В эфире передача DevOops в рабочий полдник.
Hello again, and welcome to the third episode of DevOps After Lunch, a show that goes live each Friday at 6 p.m. Moscow time. For each episode, we try to invite one of the speakers from our future conference, and we try to invite some unusual guests that you don't often see at our conferences and our talk shows. And of course, we try to get some spoilers for the future talks from them. In our next episode, we'll meet Pasha Finkelstein, but today our special guest is Mark Smalley. Hi, Mark.
To be with you, and nice to be called an unusual guest.
Yeah, like we don't have guests like you very often, but we'd like to meet more and we'd like to know you better personally. And my first question is, actually, I visited your site, smalley.it, and it has a About Us page, and it's suspiciously empty. Can you tell us about you? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, that was quite a surprise. I didn't even realize that I had an About Us page. I used the Google Sites stuff for my website, and I clearly haven't paid much attention to it. So I'll have to repair that. Yeah. As for myself, I do consulting and training in the DevOps IT service management space. Service experience is one of the topics as well. Just taking a couple of current clients, and they're helping a client build an academy, an educational institute, so helping them with courses and stuff like that. That's on the topic of service experience. And another customer I'm helping with application management services. That's what they provide to their customers on a commercial basis. And I'm helping them with a pretty big tender. So that's what I do at the moment. Before that, and I've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years now as an independent consultant. Before that, I worked for a managed service organization, Capgemini, fairly large external service provider. On a personal note, I was born in London, where I met a Dutch girl. We got married in London. I emigrated to the Netherlands, and that's where I've been living for 45 years now, just south of Amsterdam.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, but I also see your bio on Twitter, and it says that you are a writer, a speaker, a trainer, and a bridge builder. Okay, I can understand a writer, I can understand speaker and trainer, but what is a bridge builder? What do you do day by day?
Bridge builder. Bridge building is I do a lot of speaking. I go to lots of conferences. I have broad interests. So you'll find me at architecture conferences, business analysis conference, DevOps, service management, stuff like that. Almost everything except security, which is my weakest link. Well, maybe I should go to more security conferences because that's my weakest link. That's really not, but it's not my interest. But I go to these conferences and I notice people in their own bubbles. So you go to an IT service management conference, you've got the same kind of people talking about the same kind of things. They don't talk to the business analysts, they don't talk to application developers, they don't talk to other people. And what I like to do is try and build bridges between these communities. Because what we do at work is we often talk about multidisciplinary ways of working. Look at product teams, for instance, where you get various disciplines in one team, which can be very effective. But if you look at how we organize ourselves as professions, we seem to divide ourselves up into groups. So I like to build bridges between groups. That's a bit of the bridge. And this is interesting as well because I've traveled quite a bit. I know a fair number of people, and it gives me great pleasure. I remember one instance when I was in Japan. and I had the pleasure of introducing one Japanese gentleman to another Japanese gentleman. There's this guy from Europe who's introducing Japanese people to each other. That's it feels sort of weird.
So you build bridges between people and between maybe some groups or organizations, but what is the effect of that? Is it just a hobby of yours, or maybe you can tell us a story about the most impressive change that came after building the bridge, so to speak?
Yeah, that's always difficult to tell. That's the sad story, I think, about consultants in general. You go to a company, you do stuff, you do your best. The only thing you can do is offer your hand. You extend your hand. Whether somebody takes it, what they do when you're gone, often you never know. And that's that's a tragedy of being an external consultant. And it's the same with bridge building. I think I've written a couple of papers, for instance, joining. I remember I did something with the information management community and the business analysis community. Wrote a white paper or something about 5 or 6 years ago. And the organizations, the professional organizations, seem pleased with the bridge, but you never know with these kind of things. You can only do your best.
Well, having no way to understand if your job is successful is very hard for me, actually. What about you? How can you understand that your consultant job is effective? How can you understand that you're making some progress for your clients?
Well, I guess if they pay the bills.
Well, as for large corporations, paying the bills is not actually always related to some profit or something that is useful. They may need compliance or something.
Yeah, I think you do from time to time, and it is often it's the smallest things. And I remember something going back ages now, maybe 20 years, no, certainly maybe 30 years even going back. But it made an impression. It was something very small, but it made a big impression on me. I was working for the organization in the Netherlands that supports all of the chartered accountants. It's a membership organization. And there was a lady at the office, a lady called Nell, I remember her name. And on an annual basis, they did surveys amongst the accountants. And the surveys, this was good old-fashioned days, when they sent back the surveys in the post. So Nell had a big stack of surveys which he had to enter in a pretty primitive information system. And it took her a lot of time. She got a form, and she really just had to record whether the survey had been received. But she had to tab through lots of fields and finally say yes. Took her ages. So she asked me, could I speed it up? And what I did was I built a very simple transaction where she only had to enter the ID of the accountant and enter yes, and that was it. It cost me maybe 10 minutes to code. It's nothing, insignificant. But when I went to the office, you could see, she gave me such a warm welcome. And that's when you realize that sometimes tiny little things, we could talk about empathy that we should have more of, I think, when we're dealing with users. Tiny little things can really make a difference in their working life. That was one example that comes to mind.
Yeah, okay. That sounds maybe not as impressive as I expected, but still some use from consultants.
Yeah.
Okay. Mark,
I was just a simple programmer then.
Oh, okay. Programmers are useful. I can understand that.
Yeah.
Mark, talking about progress.
Yeah, and now I have a philosophical question. Just occurred to me. If you have ever been a programmer, can you be a non-programmer after that, or are you always a programmer? Are you a programmer for life, or can you be an ex-programmer?
I think it's a nice place to
very good
introduce
question.
Baruch. Baruch,
Yeah,
are you a
as
programmer now?
as an ex-programmer or programmer for life, that's a good question that I relate. So I do occasionally write code, but last time I had something to do with software development directly in my title was 10 years ago. And but you know what? I don't think you can be an ex-programmer. It's like playing the piano or riding the bicycle. Once you know it, it's a part of who you are, and it's not really goes away. The way you think about stuff changes forever. The way you look at all the software in the world is changed forever. So I don't think you can be an ex-programmer and just unlearn everything you learned.
No, I as well. I think it forms your way of thinking. It's a certain attitude that you have. By the way, you mentioned riding a bike and playing the piano. Once I had a strange experience. I used to play guitar a fair bit, but when we had kids, that stopped. And I think after 10 years, I picked up the guitar again with the expectation that I would immediately be able to play it, just like riding a bike, assuming that you never forget it. I forgot it.
Exactly.
That was so frustrating. You
No,
sort of
I mean
look
you can
into
forget
the
it to an
chords.
extent. I agree that if I open up an IntelliJ idea, I probably won't be as productive as I was 10 years ago when it was my job for 9 hours a day, right? I'm probably rusty and will take me some time to get back in shape, but still, I still know how to do it. And it's the same with playing a guitar, right? I mean, yes, in the beginning it was a little bit rusty. You didn't exactly remember how to do it, but I bet it took you like 2 minutes for everything to come back.
No, I gave up.
Yeah,
It was,
I just remember that my employer still pays for my IntelliJ IDEA license, and I didn't open it for a year, maybe. Okay, it's time to tell them to take away my license. Okay.
yeah,
Actually, as for me, I think it's more like not only like a programmer thing, but in general, it's an engineering thing. So it's like an engineering approach, regardless of if you are a software engineer or maybe some construction engineer. It's just a way to do things, like an engineering way. I don't know how to explain this. It doesn't go
yeah,
away, of course.
yeah. No, that's it. Yeah, yeah, and that is. I think that's a blessing and a curse. An engineering attitude. I think there are two sides to that, which we might discuss. Um, with engineering, certainly with software, we tend to think in zeros and ones, very binary. It's either this or it's that. It's if then else. If you're coding, it's if then else. But if you look at the kind of systems that we are increasingly dealing with, complex systems that are intrinsically unpredictable, you're talking almost about if then maybe. How do you deal with that? When there are so many variables that you can't find a single root cause of what went wrong. That's I think that area of complex systems, complex adaptive systems. That's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, just like earlier today, I was rereading the paper by Richard Cook, the seminal paper about complex systems that fail. Surely you know that paper, yes?
Yeah, no, fascinating. Yeah, great stuff. I
Yeah,
think by the way, we should add this to some notes that we could share with the audience because
yeah,
I think I'm sure we'll come up with more stuff. This is such a great paper. Everybody should read it.
yeah. It's like no, it's not new. I think it's from 1998, maybe.
Yeah, it's old.
Somewhere around the year 2000, yes. And probably no microservices back then, yes. No like complex software systems like we have them now, or maybe complex in maybe in some other way. Yes.
Yeah, but he's in any case he's talking from a completely different perspective because he's a medical guy. He's a practicing anesthesiologist. He stops people from dying. That's his job. But even in this completely different world, he comes across the same kind of phenomena that we do in IT. And he's, everybody read the paper. It's great. It's just it's a fairly small paper, but it is packed with things that we as engineers should think about.
Yeah, it's like five pages long, and it's pure gold. So it contains statements that I don't think they need like proof. So I was reading them, and I just agreed in my mind. And generally papers are about proofs, yes, but this one is just a condensed experience from a doctor. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think.
He does. If you look on YouTube, you'll find a pretty decent talk. I'll make a note of that. Cook. I'll send you the link to that so people can listen to him talk about it as well. He explains it very well. Good reference for people.
And I think this topic didn't change, haven't changed for the 20 years that passed. But I heard your 50 years experience in the information technology field. Can you tell us maybe what did change? What changed during these 40 years, apart from the obvious, like computers became fast and everything?
Yeah, well, complexity is one of. I think I can probably two main things. I'll start with the big one. I think the big change that I've seen, that everybody's seen, is the democratization of IT. In the beginning, you used to take the problem to the computer. Companies just had one computer. You took the problem to the computer. Now that you take the computer to the problem. So everybody. So that's a democrat. Everybody has it. I think that's one of the big things. At a much smaller and much more personal level, just like I remember that little thing that I did for Nell at the Chartered Accountants Organization. I remember, was it the 80s or the 90s when Windows got introduced? I was a mainframe guy. I worked in COBOL. Just as an aside, this is the first. I think the first IT book I bought, Principles of Program Design, Michael Jackson, and it's because it's fairly old. It's somewhere where I keep relics from the past. So you can see a real punch card, which I used at the beginning to do stuff. And very, very coincidentally, this is 40 years ago that I went on the course to learn structured programming. And Michael Jackson, not the singer, another Michael Jackson, he's the author, professor. I thought although he didn't know me, of course, I just read his book. He had influenced my my career, my thinking. He'd programmed me how to program. So I thought I'll see whether he's still alive. So I looked him up he's got a Wikipedia page. He seemed to be alive. So I found an email address somewhere. And I sent him a short note, just saying, it's ages ago, you don't know me. But I was one of the people that read your book and was influenced by it. So I expressed my gratitude. And he's 89 now. He's very, very much interested in cybersecurity. So I got a nice email back from him. So isn't it wonderful? That was I thought that's nice to hear from somebody who's almost 90 and really still involved, still interested in this stuff. Anyway, going back to, I mentioned the big picture. The macro thing is the democratization of IT. The smaller thing that I came across with Windows was with mainframes, when something went wrong, you could get a memory dump and work out which part of the program, which data caused the problem. You could find a root cause. When Windows came along, with its complexity, with the multiple variables, and of course there are even more now, you simply could not determine what went wrong. You turned it off, you turned it on again, and it worked. And that was so frustrating. And that is all about complex systems. You have to realize you can't control these things. You have to learn to live with them. And that's one of the things that really it was frustrating at the time. It was only 5 or 10 years later, I think, that the penny dropped, and I realized, oh yeah, that's just the way things are.
And I think it relates very closely to the concept that all complex systems are broken, are always broken. Like they are on the verge of collapsing, and it's like one straw that breaks the camel's neck, and it causes like a cascading failure. And this is also a part of Richard Cook's paper, like
Yeah,
this
that's why
inherent brokenness of systems.
Yeah, he says it's not surprising that systems fail. It's surprising that they don't fail, because there are so many defects built into the system. He said most of them are fairly innocent. Either they don't manifest themselves, or when they do, you tackle them fairly easily. But sometimes all of the stars align, and you get too many things happening at the same time. That causes an incident. And now I can look at you as the expert in that system and ask you, what's the problem? You don't know. You're the guy who knows the most about the system, but you don't know the exact way to act. So you have to take a gamble. And that means that when you from time to time take the wrong gamble, the best gamble you can, but you take the wrong gamble, if I'm your manager, if I start blaming you for doing the wrong thing, you're not going to do it anymore. So as a manager, I need to give you a degree of psychological safety in the workplace, so you feel free to share your opinion without fear for your reputation or your position at work. So now we're getting on to something that interests me, the cultural side of organizations. There has to be a certain culture to deal with these kind of systems, that you don't blame the person, you look at the system, what happened in the system that caused this to happen, and how can we deal with it. But that's all in Richard Cook's book. It's good by the way to see that if you look at other conferences, the DevOps Enterprise Summit is the one that comes to mind. Richard Cook often speaks at that conference. Sidney Decker is another professor, and Steve Spear, who I had the pleasure of speaking with in London last year or the year before. I think they're all in the same kind of area of safety and complexity and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that. And I'm very much fascinated by all this like post-mortem writing culture and like learning from the feedback from your own failures. And I gave a talk about that at one of our previous conferences. So I'm all for that, and I see a lot of usefulness in that. And I also think that talking about postmortems, I think that gathering them and analyzing them as a whole, as a big like body of evidence, can lead to some useful and maybe not so obvious conclusions. So if you take postmortems one by one and you try to find the root cause, you try to invent something to fix that, it's one thing. But if you have like several thousand of postmortems like we have at our organization, you can analyze them as a whole, and you can like categorize them and invent some solutions that prevent not a single problem, but like a whole class of problems. And that's I find this very, very, very useful. I don't think a lot of people do that. Like you won't find that in Google as SRE book or something. So they just feel like yeah.
No, you're right. I don't think that people make the time for them. It's under this is such a tricky thing. People have other things to do. People have more urgent things to do. That's the trouble. You have to make time for these things. You have to invest in the future. I was talking to somebody else recently about the big paradoxes in life. I said there are two things. It's doing things now versus doing things in the future. So making the choice between short term, long term, and it's them and us. Do I invest in my own group or with collaboration with another group? So usually it's them and us, and it's now and then. It's one of the paradoxes.
I'd like to know what's your perspective. I think nowadays we have more agile teams like startups that move fast and change and break things all the time, and they appear and disappear. Is it still useful to like invest in your future? Because usually you're not sure if you have any future. Like why do I invest in my infrastructure that may withstand like the next 5 years of development? I might not have these 5 years. Maybe I'll just gather some simple solutions to things and worry about that later if I have to. But I might not have to.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. No, it's. I think with lots of these things like this topic, it's not bad that you don't have an answer. It's good to think about the question. I think that's often the question is much more important. We as experts could come up with an answer that somebody in the audience might follow, but I think that's much less valuable than asking people in the audience. Ask people in the audience, do you have these kind of problems? We wouldn't pretend to know to tell you what to do, but we can suggest some questions that you might think about. And I think helping people to think about things, that's one of the things in the talks that I often give. I like to give people stuff to think about. I like to give them my glasses to look through, shift their gaze from what they're looking at the moment. Let them look at other things. Just leave it at that. Talking to our audience, we're talking about intelligent people.
I completely agree with you, but let me be here a devil's advocate for a second. It looks like that if you take this approach and if you let people get to the right conclusions by themselves, a lot of consultants will fear that subtracts from the view of their value in the eyes of their potential customer. Because if the potential customer truly believes that they got to all the conclusions by themselves, why do they need the consultant for?
Yeah, it's strange. It's often the case with consultants or with firms that engage consultants. Often they know the answer, but they want somebody else to tell them, somebody from outside to reassure them, or they need to tell their boss. I didn't think up the answer. It was Baruch. He came up with the answer. By the way, we can blame you then when it goes wrong. That's often what they pay a consultant for. They can fire the consultant easily. But some people like a bit of support. They sort of basically know what they want, but they need somebody to reassure them that they're taking the right steps. Yeah, I don't care anymore whether somebody employs me. So that's a nice place to be with customers. I said it to the last customer that I helped. I said I don't need your money. I don't need your love. I'm looking at the issue that you have. For me, it's the intellectual challenge of getting my head around what are they trying to do, suggesting ways to help them achieve their goals. But but if they don't need me, that's fine. And having the luxury of that independence does, I think, avoid taking on work for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, no, that obviously makes sense, but I meant something else. I meant that okay, this is the right customer. They definitely need help, and they hire you because they realize that they need help. And then you do a very smart thing. You give them the tools to find the answer instead of giving them the answer.
Mm.
And then they get to the right answer with the feeling that you didn't contribute enough because they got to the answer themselves.
Yeah. I suppose that's a danger. Yeah.
So how do you, as a consultant with tons of experience, how do you find the right, uh, the middle ground between just preaching this is what you need to do, I'm the expert here, you pay me to tell you what to do, versus let's guide you to find the answer by yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the things that took me a long time to learn, um, but which is I've been applying, I think, for the past 5 years or so, is realizing that you have to be very conscious of the kind of organization, the kind of people you're dealing with, the kind of speed that they're comfortable with, and in the past, I think I've tried to push things too quickly. You have to give people time to get comfortable with ideas, to embrace them, and to do it in their own time, their own tempo, their own timing. I think that's what you have to be patient. So I find myself now saying less, saving things up for the right moment, and trying to sense when is the customer receptive for the message. You can push things too too quickly on people.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree with you, and it's probably just different types of people that you need to find the right tone. There's those who w- want you to lead them to the water, and there are those who actually will object to you if you try to just preach your ideas, and they need more of the subtle way to bring themselves to the right conclusions. Yeah,
Yeah, and
it's
that's
an interesting craft.
yeah, and it's very much about the kind of values that people have as individuals, but also as groups. For instance, different cultures that people have. I've done a very little bit of work in Japan, but enough to realize that people think differently in groups. If I'm doing a workshop with a group in Japan, and I ask people if I do a workshop with a group in Japan where the manager is present, if I ask people, what's your opinion? The first thing that they do is they look at the manager because that's the way they do things in Japan. They're looking for consensus. They're very looking at the hierarchy. Um, so you have to be sensitive to those kind of things as well. I'm sure in Russia there is a way of working which is much more effective uh, than it would be in other countries. And if you ignore that, for instance, if we're talking about agile teams with lots of autonomy, in some cultures that works, in other cultures it doesn't. So you do have to be sensitive to the values that people have, to the habits. That's a tricky thing as well.
Yep. And culture plays a paramount role in the way that you work with people. And I cannot recommend enough the Culture Map, the book by Irene Meyer. I don't know if you read it. It's amazing how different cultures actually mapping to different styles of work. And Japan is one of the extreme examples of being non-confrontational culture, that you actually cannot get them to discuss or to argue with you and to have any kind of argument with you, although it's something that sometimes you want to have, because this is where you can convince your opponent that you are right, or that your argument have merit. So it's very much about that, and also obviously personal traits.
Yeah, of course. No, of course, you have the personal traits as well. Just going back to Japan, I remember I made a fatal error of not taking my shoes off when going into a restaurant. Because in Japan, you take your shoes off. That's the custom. And the gentleman who was our host, he said, "I strongly suggest that you take your shoes off." Now, when a Japanese person says, "I strongly suggest," how would you
It
say
means that you
that?
should do it right now. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, and it's also about feedback, right? So, for example, and that's something that we get a lot. And I am originally from Russia, and then lived for a very long time in Israel, but I still have this a lot of this Eastern European culture when it comes to giving feedback. And well, uh, uh, what a reaction of, well, it nice means in different part of the world is also changes dramatically. And until you understand on which scale of this feedback you are, it might be very flattering, or it might be actually they told you that it's crap.
Yeah, no, that's right. I did a talk. It was Tuesday, I think, this week. I did a talk for a Finnish conference. It was going to be in Helsinki, but it was online. And I got a nice response from the people that the talk went well. 'Cause with Finns, if a Finn says, "No, that's okay," that's a big compliment from a Finn. They're very, very, very conservative with their praise. So, if a Finn says okay, that's great.
I wonder what we're talking for the last maybe 5-10 minutes. What we were talking about culture and like people from Japan and Finland. What does it have to do with the whole DevOps thing? Why are you talking about values and culture and ethics at the DevOps conference?
Yeah, I don't know. It's these universal things that they're not particularly about DevOps, but they're just as relevant. You mentioned ethics, for instance. If you think about ethics, you can look at this from different dimensions. But if you think about the fairly recent Boeing 737 Max tragedy, where the plane crashed and where software played an important part in the crash, you can imagine that years ago there was a software engineer coding the program that was part of the problem, part of the tragedy. Now just think about this person. Were they aware of the possible consequences of their work? That's question one. Question two is maybe they were aware. Did they feel able to express their concern about possible dangers to their management, or were they put under pressure? Now we're also talking about psychological safety. All of these things sort of mix in with each other. So it's being with ethics. It's being aware, one, of the increasingly high consequences for society and the economy that technology has. The second thing is realizing that whatever we do, it will have unintended consequences. Can be good, can be bad, but we can't predict exactly how things will happen. The third thing is, as engineers, as practitioners, we are morally responsible for our actions, including the unintended consequences. And that means that following on from that means that organizations should monitor much more than they currently do, I believe, whether people are taking ethically responsible behavior. This is an enormous problem, and it's not restricted to the DevOps area. It's equally applicable to people who are coming up with a design in the first place, and people at the other end of the chain. So I think that's universal. There's stuff that I speak about at conferences. I wrote a couple of books recently in which they mentioned these universal things that I just, as I said, I'm drawing people's attention, giving people my glasses to suggest that they look at these topics, decide for themselves how significant is this for our organization, and take the appropriate action. But people do have concerns. I was at you probably know the history of DevOps started off in Belgium 10 years ago, maybe it's almost 11 years ago now.
Almost 11, yep.
Yeah, that's right, Patrick Dubois. I was at his 10th conference in Belgium last November, and they asked me whether I'd do an open space on ethics, which was good. And people had concerns because they, as engineers, they realize that they have lots of technical power to change things, but they had concerns about, do I understand the context and the implications of my work? So do I have the big picture, or am I just a little cog in the wheel? And you can see people are meaning-seeking beings. People are looking for the bigger picture, for what they're contributing to, and people have a desire to do the right thing. So you have people concerned, engineers concerned about what's going to happen, and additionally, if they have concerns, I mentioned it previously, do they feel free to share those concerns, and will people actually do something with it? And another question, the final point on this, just for the time being, is, and suppose that you're in an organization where you feel that you can't express your feelings, and you leave, you go to another organization, that organization is still doing the wrong thing. So that's a problem as well. So this is a big thing.
That's great, and I think that it's very very important aspect. And nowadays, a lot of people realize that what they did is actually employed for less ethical purposes that they would like to. And we have a lot of examples those days, right? Starting from the companies that are not evil by their vision, by their mission or whatever, but just accidentally and maybe not even directly, their products and services are used by organizations that other people consider less ethical, and it backslashes for the organization and for the employees of the organization. I think that the other side of the coin is actually the mob that come at those people because they did something back there that now misfired and being used completely incorrectly without their knowledge or their approval, but still they are considered to be at fault because this is something they created.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. In the open space, somebody mentioned this, and it was at a time where Barack Obama had made a statement about the cancel culture, where people have been very aggressive, sort of taking really what you said, blaming people. And Obama was saying, even the greatest people, they're human beings. They have flaws. Sometimes people accidentally do the wrong thing. Should you destroy them for that? So he was making a case for, of course, paying attention to this stuff, but not destroying everybody who just makes a little mistake. It's I wrote a little blog on that. I'll give you that for the show notes, referencing that open space and the stuff that Obama coincidentally said.
Can I ask another question? I was listening to you talking about the Boeing incident and an engineer who did code that code that was faulty and that caused the accident. I was actually thinking, can you do any productive job if you're thinking about this, the result of your job, the result of your work, maybe costing some people lives? So is it at all possible to not be paralyzed by that feeling? Can you do your job and think about these things?
Yeah, one of the no, it's a good point, of course. One of the things that came up in the discussion for there's a book on my bookshelf here, High Velocity IT. I'll give you the reference to that. There's a piece about ethics in there, and when we were discussing with the authors this topic of ethics or techno ethics, one of the things was to try and get people to discuss these difficult topics with other colleagues. So it's not just your problem as an individual. You're sharing this. I believe they do this in the medical world as well. Discuss things where there is no right answer. You're choosing between two bad options, which is the least bad option. They discuss things, come to some kind of professional consensus that this is the least worst action that we should be taking, and that's what they do. So it's sharing the load with other people. I think that's the main point there. Recognizing that you will have these dilemmas and discussing it with your professional colleagues and coming to the least worst option.
Yeah, talking about your book, can you tell us in a few words what it's all about? What is this book about?
Yeah, it's a weird book. It's ITIL, and ITIL is associated with old-fashioned IT. ITIL is a framework. It's 30 years old. It really comes from the old deterministic way of thinking in processes and if then else. But it's come a long way. And with the recent update which happened this year, last year, Axelos, the owners, asked me to write a book which is more about IT service management for highly digitally enabled organizations. So the kind of organizations that use digital technology to do things significantly differently, or even do significantly different things because technology enables them to do that. And of course, we all know the examples of Airbnb and Uber on the extreme side. But in general, it's IT service management for the kind of organizations that place higher demands on IT and therefore require different ways of thinking and different ways of working. And what I did was I spoke with 50 people, 50 people, asking them across 18 countries, asking them which are the most important things that you would like to see in the book. I wrote the book. I wrote about half of the book. The other half was written by 20 people. We wrote about the topics that we'd selected to give the readers an illustration of the kind of things that you come across in these kind of organizations. I was particularly pleased with the diversity of the authors because a third came from the core IT service management area, about a third from Agile and DevOps communities, and a third from outside IT completely. So I got a pretty broad, talking about things like ethics, or Toyota Kata, which you might have come across. I got Jeff Leiker, who wrote the book The Toyota Way, which has sold almost 1 million copies. That's about management in a manufacturing industry. It's not about IT, but there's some great universal stuff that you can also apply to DevOps/IT service management. So that's really that's really basically what the book's about.
Yeah, the intersection between how methodologies apply to more broad areas than just being invented is fascinating. And I think the Agile itself, that kind of grew out of extreme programming, which was about programming, but now became like the environment that we live in, and without any doubt the most efficient way to do everything in life. I mean, agile is not about software, agile is not about DevOps, agile is how you live. You gather feedback and you decide, you defer your decisions as late as possible to be able to adjust to changing reality. This is kind of a description of everything. And speaking
well,
about that, there is, I guess it will be the last question that I want to ask. What I see now, and it makes me very sad because it makes me mostly feeling old, is that we have a new wave, new generation of people that was born into agile. And when I'm saying born, not necessarily they were born after 2000, but they entered the industry, or they learned everything there was to learn about the industry with agile already won. Agile won the world, right? There is no waterfall anywhere, and this is a done deal. And this is the only methodology that is now not not kind of taught as one of the options, but this is how we do things. And it fires back very interestingly when people claim that uh, they don't understand what the fuss about agile even is, why people came up with the manifesto. Isn't it like obvious? Isn't it like the way the world is? And it both fascinates me and it makes me very sad, because um, uh, it's a huge achievement. It's a huge win for all of us, and seeing how it trivialized to, well, this is the natural order of things, actually means that this achievement is being completely ignored, and sometimes even the people who came with it are now rendered as people who just wrote bunch of banalities that are clear for everybody.
yeah, I think that's a good observation. It We could have a whole talk about agile as well. It's the same with all of these things. They start off with such a great idea, then you get a curve which goes up and then it goes down. I think, people are arguing about how to stick sticky notes on boards. That's not what agile is about. It's People have forgotten what it was all about and are now focusing on trivial details. That it's become it's strange, strange. It, it's like there's a story you might have heard it. It's the fish and water. There are two fish swimming along together, and an older fish comes by and he says, "Hi guys, how's the water today?" And he swims off, and these two young fish look at each other and say, "What's water?" Because that's the only thing they know. And it's a great example of what you said. These new people, they only know agile as the way to do things. They don't have the broader perspective that there are other options. And it would be good. I think I'll include that in the notes as well, referring people to the Cynefin sense-making framework, which is very useful to understand the nature of the kind of system, the kind of environment that you're working in, particularly in degrees of predictability, and understanding when agile is the great place to do stuff, and when possibly different ways might be more appropriate. So looking at the nature of the kind of system you're dealing with and selecting the right kind of tool that fits in that situation. So I think that's another thing that we could possibly trigger our audience to think about. Are they using the right tools for their particular organization and systems?
Yeah, yeah. What I meant was slightly different. Not that it's a shame that people are not aware of different methodologies, but the fact that people are not aware that the world that they live today and the tools that they use today weren't just born out of the thin air as the natural order of things. There are giants that moved entire industry into this direction, and now trivializing their actions by saying, well, this is always how it would be, what's the big fuss, is a huge shame for me. I can think about other examples from other areas. For example, the world of abundance that we live in and the comfort of our economic and political systems are now taken for granted and criticized by tons of people for very, very valid criticism, but then completely disregarding the what happened before that and how this world actually came to be. So this is kind of how I see agile in the IT world today. People criticizing it for good reasons, but take it completely for granted, and that makes me a little bit sad.
Guys,
Okay,
I think
one last question from me.
we're running out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, I had one last question also. Talking about the ETL and the thing that is around for 30 years now. I actually read one review, like a feedback for your book on your site, and it states that if I hadn't known, I would never have thought this was about ETL. It's cool and it's universal. And that review was probably left by some person from the next generation, not the current generation maybe. And I'd like to ask you, why do people think that ETL is not cool anymore? Maybe it's not universal or exciting. What do you think?
Yeah, well, this was one of the old, well, not as old as me. He was one of the older generation, so he had a pretty broad perspective, which was good. And I am always apprehensive when I talk about ITIL at DevOps conferences, because DevOps has, we mentioned it earlier, it has a bad name. It's not cool, and it's a pretty easy target because it's old. It's the traditional way of working, so it's quite easy for rebels like these DevOps guys to look at the old way of working and say, that's no good, so we'll shoot that. No more ITIL anymore. Being unaware that it emerged from a different way of thinking about things, it was very much sort of deterministic, if then else, process based. Talking about fail-safe systems instead of systems that are safe to fail, getting back to Richard Cook. And in addition to that, although it wasn't intended as prescriptive guidance, then we get human nature. You get people reading the books and thinking, well, if ITIL says this, I have to do this. So they're blindly following guidance, which is inappropriate. So why it's not cool is that people have been misusing it in the past, giving it a bad name. I think that's possibly why. And it was like it's the guidance in ITIL you can see as a lagging indicator. When something gets into ITIL, it's generally well accepted practice. It's not on the leading edge. I think that my book is probably the most leading part in ITIL. They asked me specifically to go out towards the edge. It's pretty traditional stuff, and millions of people use this stuff. It's, sort of mainstream, but it does have an old-fashioned image.
Yeah, it's like they say, nobody ever got fired for following ITIL, yes?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, similar.
It's originally about the IBM, of course, but
yeah, but I'm pleased to see. I know the authors who have last year rewritten the guidance, and they are well aware of what's going on in other industries. They've been inspired by stuff in the agile industry, in the DevOps industry, and have tried not only to align with the other communities, that's my bridge building part, but also to adopt the kind of practices and apply them to IT service management. It's what I call sort of reconstructing IT service management. That's something I write about in the High Velocity IT book.
Thank you very much, Mark. But unfortunately, we don't have much time anymore. We'll be looking forward for your talk at the DevOps conference in December. And it was very nice to meet you and to talk to you today. Thank you very much. And
Great
see you
pleasure.
at the conference.
Thank
you
you,
very
and
much.
we're looking forward to having the conference. That would be amazing. I hope people now got a little bit of sense of what, how fascinating your talk will be, and that was the purpose of our broadcast. So thank you very much.
В эфире передача DevOps в рабочий полдник.